Welcome to the Directors UK podcast. We're the professional association for UK film and TV directors. No matter the format, no matter the genre, our featured directors share their approach to the craft. We hope you enjoy.
Good evening and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Toyin and I'm the Member Engagement and Events Manager here at Directors UK. Tonight we are in Kirk Jones on I Swear, hosted by Alex Godfrey. A warm welcome to you both. Thank you to Studio Canal for helping us put this event together, and I will now hand over to Alex. Enjoy.
Thank you. Hi, folks. Hi, everybody. Hi, Kirk.
Hi, everyone.
So yes, I'm Alex Godfrey. I'm a film journalist, writer and editor, and I absolutely love this film. I wrote about it for Empire magazine. I saw it a few months back and absolutely fell in love with it and wanted to do whatever I could to champion it. I met Kirk and some of the team, and it's just been an absolute joy to hear about the making of it, which we're going to dive into right now. Kirk, congrats first of all. I mean, it's such a beautiful film. It's been out a couple of months. It's done incredibly well here in the UK. You're getting global distribution as we speak. You had a great night at the Biffers recently. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling really good. You spend so much time on a project and you work for so many years, and you always hope that A, you will get distribution, and B, that if people do see it, they'll appreciate it or enjoy it. And I'm really, really proud of the film. Really, really proud of the film, and all of the people who came together in order to make it possible.
Yeah, well, we'll be hearing about a lot of them very shortly. Let's start, though, with John Davidson. Now, you heard of John the same way that millions and millions of other people did via the broadcast of the QED documentary John's Not Mad on BBC Two, I think, in 1989. Can you cast your mind back to that evening, sitting down in front of the TV, and what that experience was like for you and why it stuck with you for decades?
Yeah, I wasn't a writer and I wasn't a director in 1989. I think I was a runner. I think I was still a runner. I was driving around Soho delivering stuff. But at home that night, like millions of other people, I watched John's Not Mad. And I thought, if ever I do get to make films, if ever I do get to write screenplays, I think this story is extraordinary. I think what fascinated me most about the documentary wasn't just the fact that there was a 15-year-old boy who was dealing with the onset of Tourette's, and having grown up with a relatively ordinary life. He had friends, he was good at school, he was good at sports. He was kind of an ordinary kid. Having spent the first 14 years of his life in that way, he was suddenly starting to blink, tick, move his head, move his neck. And then, of course, that moved on to what we now know is called coprolalia. Coprolalia is a form of Tourette's. There are many, many different forms of Tourette's. A lot of people think that Tourette's is someone who walks down the street just shouting crazy things and swearing. And actually, that's only about 10% of people who have Tourette's. But John does have coprolalia. And I think even John would say that he has a pretty dramatic version of it. So I was looking at a 15-year-old boy who was shouting the most inappropriate things, who was being told by school that he was insane, that he would either end up in prison or in an asylum. And it was incredibly sad. And I followed his story as he grew older, because there were probably about 3 documentaries over the years. So I think the next time I saw him, he was in his 20s. And again, it was incredibly emotionally engaging. There's a 23 or 4-year-old guy who basically said, like anyone else of his age, he just wanted a relationship. With John, he wanted to try and find a girlfriend. And he said, how can I do that when I walk up to someone in a pub and I try and introduce myself and then I spit in their face? And I just thought, wow, it's hard enough for all of us to find a partner in this world. But when you cannot get past spitting in their face when you first approach them. I really felt for John. But at that time, in his 20s, I started to realize that there was a significant amount of humor that was kind of built in to Tourette's. And I remember when I first met John, I said, look, if I said that I had identify a level of humor, would that embarrass you? Would it upset you? Would it anger you? And he said, no, I have had the most tragic but humorous life journey that you could ever imagine. And of course, as a writer and as a director, realizing that this was an opportunity to not only show the condition, to hopefully educate people on what Tourette's and neurodiverse conditions were like, but also from a dramatic and a filmmaking point of view, take the comedy and the emotion and literally just smash them together. And I use the word smash because Tourette's, when you see it in its kind of purest form, and coprolalia is very dramatic and explosive. So that was really my journey with John. It started in 1989. It ended, well, when I say ended, I actually got to meet him about 3 years ago and went up to Scotland, spoke to him, sat with him, had a cup of tea. He ticked and he said things that were inappropriate to me. We spent about 3 days together, at the end of which I said, look, I would really, really like you to consider the idea of me writing a script and making a film. And he said, great. He was really excited by that proposal.
And you showed him, I know he didn't just, he was enthusiastic. And I think from what he told me, because I met him on Zoom when I did the magazine article, he'd had some less positive experiences with the media in the past who were maybe less sensitive and a bit exploitative. But I think one of the things that you did was you showed him, or you sent him some of your previous films. And I think you told me that was to show him maybe an indication of what you could do tonally. And I think he found that reassuring. Am I remembering that rightly?
Yeah, that sounds about right. We talked about, I think he said that he had seen one of my films. I'm trying to remember which one now, but it was one that was more of a comedy. And he said, oh yeah, I saw so-and-so. It was, it's a comedy. Is that what you're thinking? Are you going to make a comedy? And I said, well, don't just look at one film. I've made 4 or 5 films. Let me send you some of the others that I've made. Because what I like to do is to try and find a really delicate balance between humor and emotion in films. And I think if you go back to, my first film was Waking Ned, then I did Nanny McPhee. Then I went to America and I did Everybody's Fine with Robert De Niro. And I think if you look back, there is a common thread. I don't really sit down and intend it especially when I write films, but I think you will find that there's a common thread of trying to allow humor and emotion to exist side by side, to handle them both delicately and to intertwine them as best as possible. And I think what that delivers is a sense of a roller coaster. People, when they see I Swear, they say, it was like a roller coaster. I was crying 1 minute, I was laughing the next, and then I was crying again. And I don't know, I think that's life. I think the reason why we can relate to that is because life isn't simple. You don't get up and have a really happy day every day, and you don't hopefully you don't have a really awful day every day. It's a mix. And that is what interested me in this story in particular. So I showed him other films. I would have sent him Waking Ned and maybe Everybody's Fine as well, where there was a level of natural humor, but there were also some, quite dark topics in there as well. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to show him that you can use humor and it can be done tastefully and in a natural, realistic way. And not necessarily be cheesy and upsetting. And, I was shocked, actually. This is not the place to go into the list of things and experiences that John had, but he told me how he'd been treated by many different areas of the media. And it was really shocking. People just wanting to get him on TV or on a show or a radio show, literally hoping that he would say something controversial and that it would be funny, and it would might increase the viewership of the program or something. I don't know, but it was awful. Some really awful things, not just to John, but to the whole Tourette's community.
Well, on that tip, can you talk about how the time you spent with him? Obviously, you got to know him. You had more meetings with him, I think, in person and on Zoom. Can you talk about how getting to know him and hearing about his own experiences informed and shaped your script and maybe changed the ideas that you might have had at the start? How did things evolve off the back of getting to know him and getting to know the subject matter?
Once I came home, once he said, yes, I'd love to do this, then I said, okay, let's schedule some more time. I think I saw him in November 22, I'm going to guess. And then at the beginning of 23, I went back to Galashiels and I stayed there again, maybe for about a week this time. And we sat down and John said, well, like, how does this work? And I said, honestly, all I want you to do is talk to me about your life experiences, all the things that have happened to you. They do not have to be in order. They can be random. You might say something to me and then tomorrow realize that you've remembered another bit. So we'll add that on. And I probably spent about a week doing that and just listening. But at the same time, I also spoke to Dottie because I was aware that John, despite his best efforts, wouldn't always remember what had happened to him at different stages of his life. So once as soon as John got bored with talking during the day, or, if he was starting to get tired, which people with Tourette's often do, because it takes an awful lot of concentration and energy to, suppress the tics, or not so much suppress them, but just be in conversation with someone like me, trying to remember everything. It's very tiring for John in particular. So I'd then go over to Dottie's in the afternoon and we'd have a cup of tea and I'd say, look, John told me this. And she said, yeah, I can remember that. He's remembering a different date. It wasn't that year, it was that year, and it was before Tommy. Blah, blah. So I started to piece everything together and I went away and I actually went down to Cornwall. When I write, I like to try and get away. There are so many reasons to be distracted when you're at home. And there's so many, I realized a long time ago that I would rather do anything to distract myself from writing during any one day. So I like to try and sort of lock myself away. And on this occasion, I actually ended up going to a car park most days. I would Harlem Bay in Cornwall. I would pull in, I'd get coffee. I'd move over to the passenger seat because I didn't want to have the steering wheel in front of me. And I had my laptop on my lap. I moved the seat back. I had my coffee. And I just started to go through all the notes and I pieced together the script. And it came out. I found that worked for me really well, just sitting in the car. Probably not very good for my back, but after a week or two of doing that every day, I had about 190 pages. And that wasn't the script. That was John's experiences, kind of cut and pasted, set out in some kind of order, which reflected, his life. So at 190 pages, I thought, okay, I'm going to polish these up and I'm going to write a script. And I want it to be as long as it needs to be at this stage. Mm-hmm. So I came out, I think just under 200 pages was my first draft of the script. I know that that's way too long. I know it's too long for audiences. I know from a production point of view that I needed to bring it down. I started off working as an assistant film editor in the cutting room in commercials, and I used to have the opportunity to sit and watch directors work in the cutting room with an editor. And that was really useful for me. I'd been to film school as well, but this is kind of the real world. And I love editing. I welcome the opportunity to make cuts and make edits if I think it improves things. So the idea of editing 190, 200-page script down is a joy to me. I have no worries about trying to protect, scenes for the sake of protecting them. So I got it down to about 120 pages. And during that process, I've been feeding John probably 25 pages at a time. I didn't want to overwhelm him. When I first met him, I think it's quite important to mention that when I realized the community had not been given the respect that it should have had in the past.
With the Tourette's community you're talking about.
The Tourette's community. I said to John at the beginning, one of the first things I'd like you to consider is I'd like you to be an executive producer on the film.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, that sounds great, but what does that mean? And as you would. And I said, what it means is that you'll have a voice. You can speak up, and I will guarantee that I will listen to you, and you will have a position on the film. So I'll show you all of the pages. I'll show you the script. Even when I've shot the film, I will show it to you, and I will get your opinion on what we call the rough cut. And if you're unhappy with some things, then we'll work it out. I want this more than anything to be a good experience for you. And he said, great. So I did. I fed him all the early pages of the script. I even, as he got into production, I was sending him location photos. And I was saying, because we were shooting in Galashiels for budgetary purposes, and it was great. And I could tell that we were going to be able to set the film as if it was being shot in Galashiels, which is where John's from. And I would send him pictures from the location scouts saying, do you think this could be Galashiels? And the response would be, absolutely not. You'd never see this, you'd never see that. And then I send him an hour later, and then he'll say, yeah, that could definitely be Galashiels. So right the way through, from script development to locations to the cut, even down to, the way we've been promoting the film and trying to involve John, but not over-tiring or stress him too much. I've engaged with him and involved him.
So it sounds like it doesn't sound like you planned the story first, that you had beats and characters. It feels like more of an organic process in terms of you'd spent all the time with him and you just started writing.
Yeah, I didn't feel like this was a story that needed me to be heavy-handed. I didn't feel like I needed to say, okay, now we're going to have a really funny scene, or now it's going to be really dramatic. Yeah. I found John's story, his true life story, as he told it to me, to be enough to justify presenting that as it happened, as accurately as I possibly could to an audience. For me, it was enough. And although I knew it would need some manipulation with regards to the order and the characters, and I even adjusted some of the dates, and Tommy died at a slightly different year than he actually did in the real world, but in real life. But I just made tweaks in order to help the drama, help the flow, and to keep it down to the length of about 2 hours.
Okay, so I mean, you said a couple of minutes ago that you had 190 pages at one point, which I guess was just everything. I was going to ask if there were things that you wanted to. It sounds like you weren't precious about getting rid of stuff. One of the things that I noticed early on, and other people have asked me about actually, was the fact that most people knew about John from John's Not Mad, but you made a quite firm decision to not have that in there. Was that something you had considered early on, or did you just know instinctively that it wouldn't be right for the story that you were telling?
I knew that the interaction that John had age 15 with a documentary crew who came to Galashiels and who chose him to shoot for the documentary had an impactful and pretty positive influence on his life. What I thought was that if I started telling the story of a film, which also had a film within it, and we were telling the making of the film, it wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to keep everything clear and simple and streamlined. And that was a decision I made almost immediately within a few days. I would say, of the people that have spoken to me about the film, the people who are aware of the documentary, maybe 3 or 4% of people have said, oh, why didn't you keep the filming in? And why didn't you keep the documentary in? And so that to me suggests that it wasn't missed. Yeah. So I don't think it was missed. I think if it had been in there, it could have got complicated. And I just wanted to keep this simple and realistic and believable.
It makes perfect sense. On the other hand, I want to ask about the band, which is, the band that regulates John's Tourette's, or that can regulate his Tourette's, that only came about. It was only invented 3 or 4 years ago, and I believe that wasn't in your original draft. You didn't know about it back then, but the world didn't really know about it, and that changed things for you structurally, I guess, right?
Yeah, I think when I put that 190-page version together, John hadn't told me about the band yet. And I don't know whether that's because he hadn't been to Nottingham or whether he'd been, but he forgot to tell me and he was distracted with something else. But essentially, I called him up one day, just said, "How you doing? I'm getting on okay with the script." And he said, "Oh, I ought to tell you something." I said, "Okay." And he said, "I had this letter from the University of Nottingham a while ago, and they said they're working on this like a watch." He said it's like a big Apple Watch, and they want me to go down, and specifically, they believe it could help some people who live with Tourette's. And I said, "Well, are you going to do it?" He said, "No, no, no." I said, I did it. I did it. I went down. I've already been down." And he said, "It was extraordinary." And he said, "I put the band on and I walked around." He said, "They also let me bring it home for a few days." So then I'm starting to get interested, and I'm thinking, well, okay, it's all very well if you sat in your living room with this band on, that's one thing. But did you go out? And if you did go out, what was the effect? So he said that he was sat in his living room in his own house, and something felt wrong and something felt a bit unusual, and he couldn't work out what it was. And he realized that he wasn't ticking. And you have to remember that this is a guy who sits on his sofa watching TV, and behind him on his plaster wall are lots of little kind of golf ball divots in the wall, and they basically come from his knuckles. And he's watching the news or he's watching sport, and bang, he smashes his hand into the wall. That's just one of his uncontrollable tics. It just come along now and again.
Yeah.
And he said he sat there quietly. He didn't feel any anxiety. He felt very much at peace. And he thought, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to put this to the test. I said, "Did you go to the shops?" He said, "Yes, I went to the shops." He said, "I ticked once." He said, "I'm going to say that my tics were reduced by something like 70 or more percent." He said, "I'm actually going to say that anxiety levels were almost at zero." He said, "I didn't feel any anxiety." And again, you have to remember that with Tourette's, the higher the anxiety, the more active the Tourette's become. If you're dealing with coprolalia, the more swearing. So it's kind of a vicious circle. And unselfishly, my first thought was, wow, this is incredible for people who struggle with Tourette's. And, this really sounds like something that might help them, and it might help John. Selfishly, I suddenly thought, as a filmmaker who's right in the middle of editing a script, selfishly, I will be absolutely honest with you, I thought this could be a really interesting ending to the film. It's a surprise. It's current. It's modern. It's happening now. It's something that is affecting John and is working for John, and I'm telling John's story. And up until that point, I think I probably thought that receiving the MBE would be the end of the film. But it always felt a little bit predictable. You start with him going into the Queen, fuck the Queen, blah, 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 and then you end up with him getting the MBE. So I wasn't incredibly blown away by that. But as soon as he told me the story, so then within a couple of days, I'm talking to everyone at Nottingham. I'm trying to work out what this is. Is it true? How many people does it affect? And then I wrote it into the script.
What a gift all round.
It was, yeah.
So with your script done, how can you talk about then accruing your team, your heads of departments? How did you assemble that group, and how did you pitch the film to them, or was it just, "Here's my script"? What do you think?
It kind of is, "Here's my script," but you only send that script to a select number of people, and you send it to people who you want to do the job. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sending it to them. So I knew I wanted a crew who were kind of pretty young, who I knew it was going to have to be really low budget. So that is a restriction that you take into account when you start sending the script out. There is one exception to that. Essentially, the crew and the people that I sent the script to were a real mix of incredibly experienced crew who I'd known and worked with many times before. An example of that is Simon Hayes, who's a sound mixer. and his boom operators, Robin and Arthur. I first worked with them on Nanny McPhee many years ago. I think Simon said that that was his first kind of proper studio film in the UK. Since then I think he's worked on most of Guy Ritchie's films. He's done superhero movies. He's just done the 2 Wicked films. He's won and been nominated for an Oscar, BAFTAs, everything. So I assumed that someone like Simon was kind of out of reach, financially, but also because I thought those guys are just really busy all the time. So that's one end of the spectrum of the crew that I sent it to. The end of that story is that Simon read it and he said, "When are you shooting?" I told him. He said, "We're in. We absolutely love it." And you forget that someone like Simon, who would have been shooting multi-camera now for many years, you shoot on a film like Wicked, which is extraordinary film, but you are not shooting one single camera. And because there are so many angles that are covered on those big kind of studio movies, it's very difficult for the sound department to record quality sound because they can't physically get their booms in to record the real sound. Wicked actually is a pretty extraordinary example because they record live singing. But he welcomed the opportunity to work on a low budget film, which he could see was a passion project to me and to other people. And he could see that there was an opportunity to shoot single camera. So he could get in with his 2 booms, and he believes he's recorded some of the best sound that he's recorded in decades. So he had a genuine interest, and that was just a blessing with someone who was so experienced and came with such incredible equipment and things. So that was one example. If you go to the other end of the scale, let's talk about DP. I really, really thoroughly, more than on any film, looked for a DP. I looked at so many reels, probably about 50. We spoke to different agents. They were able to put people forward if they wanted to. I had some people who I'd seen and admired their work. And I think from the 50, I got it down to about 12. And from the 12, I got it down to about 5. And in that 5 was James Bland, who was a graduate of the National Film School. I really liked his work, and that's why he was in the last 5. But there were 4 other people in the last 5. And when I spoke to James, he came prepared. He had reference stills. He talked about many different documentaries. He talked about, we talked about films like Kes, for example, which people have picked up a little bit when they watch a film, that kind of long lens, long takes, long take approach, natural as best as possible, acting, not too heavy on the coverage. But we had a really good conversation, and I just felt like he was really hungry, and hunger is still something that I would like to think I have, but I want to see it from every other member of the crew. I want them to be, and cast, I want them to be there for the right reasons. Mm-hmm. I want them, I knew no one was there for money, and I've had that before. I had that on my first film, which was Waking Ned Divine. You look around and you think no one's here for the money because there isn't any money, or there's hardly any money. So that's a good starting point, because money can be a curse. People will end up going from one job to another because they have a mortgage and they have kids and they have this, that, and the other. But when I looked around the crew, I knew no one was there for the money. What I did know is that they'd all seen the script, and they had all fallen in love with the idea of telling John Davidson's story, and they were really passionate. And that goes for me as well. Mm-hmm. We all worked to honor John and to honor his story. And when you're in a crew and you're in an environment like that, there are no egos. And I'll give you an example, actually. So this was James Bland's first film as a DOP. Yeah. And he's incredibly talented. And he could have come in and said, right, this is it. This is my big break. I'm going to show the world what I can do. And he didn't do that. He showed the world. He showed everyone what he can do, and I think he delivered a really beautiful film visually. But he didn't see it as an opportunity to show off. He also saw it as an opportunity to serve John and to serve his story. And those are the kind of people that I was looking for. Sabrina, our production designer, I think it was only her second film. She'd done commercials, she'd done promos, she'd done some short films. And she had just come off of her first film. And I'd spoken to, as you tend to do within the industry, you ask people on other productions, what was Sabrina like confidentially? And the response was, she was incredible. We could not have managed without her. We wouldn't have finished the film without her. She was really inventive. Silly things like when you shoot period pieces, it's really expensive to get cars and fill a street with cars which are of the right era. So I said to Sabrina, how had she managed? Because I'd seen the film that she just shot. And she said, it was easy. We didn't have a budget to pay for those cars. So I went out with the art department. We printed up flyers. We walked around the town. And any car that was within the era that we were looking for, we put a sticker on the front windscreen and said, look, if you want to earn £50, come and park your car in this street next Thursday afternoon. So when they got there, the street was full of period cars. And those cars, I don't know, I have no idea, to be honest, I'm just making it up, but they could have been £400, £500, £600 each to bring in on a trailer to sort out. And I thought that is the level of inventiveness that I need in order to make this film as good as possible for the budget that we need to work with.
That's a genius move.
It is. I wish I'd thought of it. Yeah.
Tell me about your casting director too, and where did you start with the casting, and what did you say that you wanted in terms of how you wanted to populate this film and what you were looking for?
A lot of these briefs and a lot of the questions that you are touching on need people to remember that as a writer and director, the whole process of finding people, of briefing people, even of directing on the set and giving notes to people is different when you're a writer-director. Mm-hmm. If I was a director, I would wait and I would find a script that I was passionate about and I would go off and I would direct that film. But what that means is that you then have a call with the casting director and everyone says, what do you think for this lead character? What do you think their qualities are? What do you think the writer intended when the writer wrote this screenplay? And it's a conversation. Even you follow that through to set. And, if I walked on set with Robert Arameo and it wasn't my script, then Rob and I would have a conversation about, how do you think we should deliver this? What do you think the writer thought when he was doing this? And there's two sides to the argument, and you discuss things, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of talking. But when you write and direct, one of the huge advantages, for me anyway, I don't know if other people can relate to this, is that I can put every single thing I'm thinking of, every nuance, every word, every screen direction into the script in the first place. So when I speak to my casting director, I don't feel the need to have really lengthy conversations about, I wonder if we did it this way, or I wonder if it did it that way. I hope that it's already in the script and she's read the script. And the same with Peter Mullen. I joked, Rob and I used to joke on set because he said, you don't give many notes, do you? And I said, I don't. I'm not one of those directors who wants to stand for 40 minutes talking through the reasoning for, why the bed is in a certain place in the room or Rob's performance or adjusting it. But what I reminded Rob was I wrote every single word, every comma of the document that he used to prepare for that scene. Most of what I have to say is already in the script. And I love working like that because what it means is that on the day, it's a lot less stressful for me. Yeah. I've done both, and I've had a lot of fun doing both. But when it is my written word, it's a completely different, it's much more joyful because to sit and hear actors repeat words that you probably wrote about a year ago or say things which you always hoped would be humorous or would be emotionally engaging, and hear them say those words, someone at the level of Peter Mullen, Maxine Peake, Robert Arameo, Shirley, it just takes it to another level. But in many ways, I'm not sure that I will focus too much from now on in my career on directing films and scripts that I haven't written. I mean, I feel that strongly about it, and I've done that for many years now. I've done both, but I'm so happy and so content with my own material, or at least co-written.
Did you start with looking for who could play John, especially the older version of John? Because, to a large extent, the whole success of the film depends on someone carrying that off on so many levels. So how did you go about doing that?
I try and keep it short because it's a long answer and I don't want to take up the session by going into it. But these were the kind of bullet points. These are the things that was going through my head. I really genuinely wanted to explore the idea of whether I had the option of casting someone with Tourette's to play the role. And I think the order in which that thought process evolved was, what about John Davidson playing himself?
Yeah.
In the opening of the film, with Dottie, with Maxine Peake saying "fuck the Queen," and then we go off and tell the story of young John. Then we would move up to a middle-aged John, and then with about 20 minutes to go at the end of the film, when John is at home vaping, and there's a letter through the letterbox, and he calls Dottie. What if that was the real John? And I thought, number one, I've never seen that before, ever. I've often seen films where at the end of the movie you see the real person. Never seen the real person carry the last 20 minutes of the film. Yeah. So I thought, well, let's start with that as a principle. Could someone with Tourette's handle this role without any negative impact on their physical health, their mental well-being, or things about Tourette's that I don't even understand yet? Remember, this was at the very beginning of the process. I was really quite excited by it. I pitched it to John. I said, look, you have been in documentaries over the years. You've been in front of a camera. You know what it's like to have a crew around you. He said, yeah, let's give it a go. John's always up for anything. So at my expense, I took a cameraman. We went up to Scotland, went to Galashiels, shot over about 3 days. I would say shooting time-wise over those 3 days was about 45 minutes or an hour a day. Yeah. So the first thing that I learned was that people with Tourette's, or when I say people with Tourette's, the important thing to remember is that everyone who has Tourette's has a different version of it. You speak to Tourette's Action and they say, if you've met one person with Tourette's, you've only met one person with Tourette's. So I was dealing with John at that point. John was getting very tired after 45 minutes. It was very stressful for him. He was unable to concentrate. He couldn't remember his lines. He kept looking the wrong way with his back to the camera. What you have to remember is that someone, or again, John's Tourette's, and I know a lot of people with Tourette's relate to this as well, is that you ask them to not do something, and the nature of Tourette's is that it will make you do it. It's why there's the scene with John playing cards, and he says, "I've got 2 aces, or I've got 3 aces." Dottie says when we came to Christmas, he would always tell people what he had bought them 6 weeks before. He just couldn't keep it in. Yeah. And so what that means is that when I said to John, can you not look at the lens if possible? He keeps looking at the lens, and he was really upset. He was quite emotional. We sat on a bench. I would genuinely say he was close to tears, and it was all too much for him. Yeah. And at the end of the process, I said, look, John, I'm really sorry. It seemed like a good idea. I'm really thrilled that I've tested it and I've tested you. And I don't think it's the right thing to do for your health and for, if we're ever going to get this film shot, on a low budget, we just can't work with those unknowns on an hourly basis. And he said, I'm so grateful that you've said that, because it was horrible and terrifying, and I do not want to do that. Then I spoke to a number of other people. I spoke to John in particular, and I started to realize one of the most uncomfortable things for me shooting those tests was that I realized I had to ask John to fake his own tics. Yeah. I had to do that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a story. I wouldn't have a narrative. I wouldn't have a drama. when he goes in and says "fuck the Queen" in the first scene, he needs to actually say it. He can't improvise that and say something else or decide to not say it. And first of all, he was really bad at it because he felt very uncomfortable. It upset him. It upset me. And I thought, if I only need one reason why I don't think this is going to work with someone who has Tourette's, then it's that reason. I'm not going to ask someone to fake their own condition and put them under that level of stress. Later on, I discovered there are many, many more reasons why it wouldn't have worked.
Yeah.
But that was the initial process. But you have to remember, at the other end of the scale, I needed to find someone who was about 13 or 14 years old in order to play young John.
Yeah.
And what the pressure on that was that if I didn't find someone who was amazing, and with 2 weeks before we were due to start shooting, I hadn't found anyone who was good enough, despite looking at hundreds of people and hitting the road myself, going to youth clubs and being shown, the best kids that were available. I'd not found anyone. And I thought, if we don't find someone incredible for the first 25 minutes of the film, then people aren't even going to stay to watch Rob Arameo arrive and deliver his performance in this film. People will turn off. And it's an awful lot to expect a 13-year-old, 14-year-old to carry a movie in a lead role. So having decided that I was not going to attempt to cast someone who had Tourette's for many, many reasons, we started to look for people, for kids who some had acted, some had not acted. And the script went to a young man who was part of a theatre school, and he was recording it. And his mum said to Scott Ellis Watson, who we eventually cast, "Scott, do you want to have a go at this? You interested or not?" And he said, "Yeah, well, I'll have a go," as a 14-year-old would say. And he was absolutely brilliant. Lauren Evans called me and said, "I think we found him. You need to watch straight away." I was on a recce. I stopped. I watched him on a phone. And even on the phone, that was good enough. So we got him in as quickly as possible. He did another casting session for me. And I told him there and then on the spot that he had the part. And there were lots of tears from him and tears from his mum. But that was, so before I found Scott, before I needed to look for Scott, I always wanted to find the adult John and the actor to play that role, because I wanted to cast the young John in a way that visually he looks similar. There's no point working with Robert Arameo as middle-aged John and then realizing that we've already cast a young man who's got ginger curly hair and dark eye. There's always a level of due diligence that you need to do to make sure that people look like each other.
Yeah.
Was that a bit long-winded?
No, well, so absolutely.
You see, there's so much to talk about in relation to casting. That was kind of a potted history.
No, it's incredible. Let's talk. You mentioned James before, your DOP. I just want to quickly get into what, as you said, your script was so precise that everything was there. But can you tell me about the conversations you had with him in terms of what you both wanted tonally in a visual sense? What was the mission there?
A very early statement that we both found ourselves repeating, actually not just visually, but even with sound, was, what if this sounded? What if this film was like the most beautiful documentary that we could possibly shoot? And I think the reasons why we were talking in that way was because I wanted the performances to be natural, believable. I didn't want them to be overplayed. I didn't want the humor to be overplayed, or the emotion to be overplayed. James quite rightly felt that he should be serving Rob's performance and serving the actors with his cinematography. And what that meant was that we talked about the idea that someone who, well, let's not say someone who has Tourette's, let's just say John Davidson, because you have to remember, we are only telling John's story. We're not trying to tell a film about everything to do with Tourette's. So because John Davidson's tics often were very physical and very big. I mean, you can tell just on if I suddenly throw my arm out, as John often does, we want to make sure that we have a frame that will capture that without having to suddenly say, oh, we're in here. We know that there's, a moment coming up where he's going to throw his arm. So now we'll have to cut back to a wider shot so we can see it. And that is why a lot of the scenes in the film were played through, not on really extreme wide shots, but wide enough to capture any movement that might have come from John. So that was one thing that we felt guided us. I felt that the level of humor and emotion played out naturally enough without feeling the need to be cutting to close-ups and to reverses. So I always made sure that we had a really wonderful master shot, and I ended up using that master shot way more than I ever imagined I would. Once we got into the cutting room, I didn't really want to cut that much. It seemed to be working. The level of acting, the quality of acting, the atmosphere, it just kind of felt like the right thing to do. So that was one thing. When I first met him, I remember him, even on the first interview, he brought some Raymond Depardon, I'm probably pronouncing that right, stills with him. And he talked about those quite a lot. A lot of work from this, a lot of photographs from the 70s and from the 80s, because he was aware that we were going to be visually telling this story as we work through. That's something that's interesting as well. I remember I wanted him to be able to do some grading tests before I even got involved in grading. I always like my DOPs to feel that they can present me with things initially without me feeling the need that as a director, I tell them what to do. And James went off and with the colorist showed me some tests, but for my liking, they were trying too hard to tell the journey of time. So what came back was, look at this, hopefully this feels really 70s, and hopefully you can notice a change and it feels really 80s. And then we've changed this and we've warmed it up when we get through to the 90s. And I looked at it and I admired it, but it was another example of something being imposed on what I wanted to treat as an incredibly simple, pure story. And I was, I said, thanks, this is great, but can we have a look at not making such a big visual change and just trusting that we will feel the change in time with the music or with the performance? So James also brought in stills from period stills from Galashiels that he'd found. I'd grown up in the 70s and 80s, so whether it was conversations with James that I was having or I'm sure soon we'll get on to talk about production design and Sabrina, I felt like I was all over it because it's my time. If I was in America, in Louisiana, and I was working on a film that, it was set in the 1950s, then, I step back and I let the experts, say their thing. But I know this world, 70s and 80s, that's my thing. That's when I was a teenager. So there was I think in general, the talk between us all was keep it simple and serve the actors and serve the performances. And when we started filming and when we saw the level of performances from Peter and Maxine and Shirley and Rob, then we knew that we'd done the right thing. We weren't trying to jazz the film up. We weren't trying to make it more interesting than the dialogue was already making it sound. We weren't trying to make Peter Mullen look like a better actor than he actually was. In general, the brief was do as little as you possibly can and just serve the actors and serve the story.
So is that basically the same sort of thing you said to Sabrina as well, your production designer?
Yeah, so she was involved on all of those conversations. Of course, there's always a discussion about palette and colors and tone and we did some other basics as well. So James and I said, look, what about movement? What do we think? What do we feel about movement? And we said, well, the truth is that when John was young and when he was with his real mum, he was within a household that was pretty conservative. And that's okay. That's not a criticism. A lot of people growing up in the 70s and 80s would be sat at the table. They'd have to be neat and tidy and polite. And that I did, there's nothing wrong with that. But what we decided to do was that was a period where when John's Tourette's were developing as a young man, he felt that he was confined, and his Tourette's were worse than they would normally be because he was terrified of what his mum was going to say, what his dad was going to say. The part in the story where his dad ends up leaving home because he's struggling to cope with John is a real thing that happened to John. So John is sat there at the table, knowing that he's about to tick, terrified of what his dad is going to say, knowing that his dad might walk out, knowing that his mum and his dad would argue. And when we translated that into a framing, we decided to just keep everything very rigid and very still.
Yeah.
Hardly moving at all. There were moments where we just drifted gently forward, but essentially it was quite photographic, mostly locked off camera. The thinking was that when Dottie came into John's life, she was saying things like, you don't need to apologize. It's okay. You want to paint your room black? Paint it black. Right. You spit across, you spit in my face. Who cares? It doesn't mean anything. Don't worry about it. And what that meant is we started moving the camera around because there was more freedom from John, from his spirit and from the way that he was able to live his life, embracing the Tourette's rather than fearing it, trying to suppress it, trying to hide it. So that was another key decision that we had about framing and camera movement in particular.
And what about time constraints? I mean, how long was the shoot, by the way?
The shoot was, okay, so this is a good one as well. So officially the shoot was 30 days long. It was 6 weeks, 5-day weeks. There's always a conversation about, can we work 6-day weeks? I've been making films long enough. I promise this isn't because of my age, now that I'm that little bit older, but I don't care if we work 6-day weeks. But over the years, I've realized that it's just too much. People are exhausted. And after a couple of weeks of 6-day weeks, people start dropping down. There's flu, then someone gets cold, and then someone passes it on to someone else. Then people are nodding off, during the day, and because they're traveling too much. So I'm not frightened of 6-day weeks, but I know that 5-day weeks are so much more productive. And everyone else on the crew does as well. They don't want to, have one day off, and that one day, if it's on a Sunday, be a prep day so they can get ready for the next 6 days. So we had 5-day weeks, but this is what we did. One of the things that I found terrifying in pre-production about the shoot was the schedule. I kept looking at it, and I knew we were working with people who had Tourette's as well. I knew that, in the film we used 30 people who have Tourette's. I knew that we would not even have an option of rushing those people. We had an access supervisor called Rona, who was Mackenzie, I think, who was extraordinary. And I really valued her input. I realized how important an access coordinator is. And for those people who might be watching who have not had a need to use one, it's someone whose only purpose on the set is to make sure that people with disabilities, or on this occasion, people who are living with Tourette's, is never as simple as someone just has Tourette's. They have Tourette's. Many people with Tourette's have levels of autism, OCD, ADHD. Some are relatively independent and have no issues whatsoever. They don't need any care or attention. Someone like Andrea, who I'm sure we'll get on to talk about, had Tourette's, and she appeared as a small part in the film. But other
Andrea is in the scene with the car.
Yes, yeah,
she is.
Yeah, she is. So we basically needed to look after people, and that doesn't help you rush on the day when you know that you might well need to be rushing. And in fact, if Rona says to me, "I'm really sorry, but the kids need a break," then they have to have a break. And so I was worried about the schedule. So the one thing that we did was we knew that we had the crew on I think we had like 4 weeks prep maybe. And the week before, we asked everyone whether they could spare the time to do their prep and shoot a very light week as well. And when I say light week, when you look at any day that you're about to shoot, you will see the real kind of gutsy stuff that you must shoot that gets the film going. But peppered within that schedule is exterior shot. John goes in and out of the newsagent. John walks along the street, and it's all those little bits and pieces which aren't really the guts of the film that often throw a day over schedule.
Yeah.
So we asked the crew to work that week and to try and manage their prep at the same time, which we did. And it was the best thing I've ever done. So we had 5 days shooting pickup shots, walking shots, some sunrises, some sunsets, some night scenes. And I know that really helped Rob. It helped him get into the character. And he says it's the best thing that he's ever done on a project. It always helps the crew because they're not used to working with each other. So they come together and they've got a week together. It helped me just get up and running and know that a week before we start the proper shoot, we're actually getting material together, which is going to save time on the schedule when we actually start to get shooting.
Well, yeah, it's beautiful stuff that really contributes to the fabric of the film and the life that you feel you're inside of. We're going to start wrapping up in a couple of minutes. So let's just quickly talk about the edit. What was that process like? How long was it? And what were the first discussions you had with Sam Snead about how you wanted to shape it? It sounds like you pretty much had the film constructed the way you wanted it to by that point anyway, but tell me if it changed.
It didn't change, if I'm honest. Sam's first cut, I knew Sam from the 80s. We were inhabited the same world, runners working in cutting rooms, assistant editors and things. So that's how I knew Sam. I admired the work that he'd done with Jonathan Glazer. He'd worked with Jonathan Glazer a lot, and he was his editor. And when I knew that he might be available, then I was just all over it and just, said, please, will you read the script? And he adored the script. So the key moment really is no matter how pleased or disappointed you are with dailies, with rushes on a daily basis, the big moment, the terrifying moment that makes all directors just want to throw up is when they see the very first cut for the very first time.
Yeah.
Because it's not polished, it's not pretty, it's not been mixed. There would have been some notes that got lost and the editor didn't realize that you'd intended to switch some scenes around, so that hasn't been done. And there's no music and they've chosen some music which you don't like or you don't think works. It doesn't matter how well the film turns out in the end. That first shock of seeing your movie put together is absolutely terrifying. And on 2 occasions in my career, I've sat and I've watched the film and I thought, it's going to be great. It's all there. It needs some tweaking, needs a bit of polishing. I wouldn't mind trying this, that, and the other, but I'm very, very happy. The only other time that happened was on Waking Ned Divine. That was my first film, and I sat and watched the film and I thought, I like this film myself. I'm pleased with it. I'm proud of it. So that was where we were with Sam. And then, of course, as any editor and any director then do, is you go through every single scene. You revisit every performance, every angle. Have we made the right decision? What if we change it? What if we play it in one shot? There were a number of scenes that we realized how strong the single shots were. And that's what we did. And we just played them in as one shot. And then you start to feed in the music from Stephen Rennicks, and then you start to hear that you've got permission from Oasis and James and Paul Weller and New Order, and you start to feed those songs into the film as well in the cutting room. So it wasn't a really long cutting process. I'm going to say about 6 weeks or so, 7 weeks, something like that. But it was enough to do exactly what we wanted to do.
It sounds like you were able to do exactly what you wanted to do from start to finish. I mean, which is rare, Can you talk about that enormous freedom that you had? And it's you talking about Waking Ned just now, and it sounds like maybe this was the first film you've worked on since then, and for which you had that extent of freedom. Would that be right to say?
Yeah, I'd say it's as simple as it's a sliding scale with stress, interference, and budget. And the high, I've worked on $40 million films,
Hmm.
and I've worked on, I can't remember what Waking Ned was now. It was probably something like £2 million, $3 million, something like that. Um, and it's very, very simple. When you're making a film for 2 million, no one's really that interested. They just leave you alone because they know that by interfering, they run the risk of upsetting the balance or the crew or the creativity. And we managed to find between us, we managed to find a way in which to finance this film, which gave me total creative freedom. And there was no one there. And when that happened, it was almost like an experiment that I was interested to do. I wanted to see what happens when filmmakers are left alone totally and completely without any interference from financiers. So I had absolute and total freedom. I had absolute final cut on this project. And I don't really ever want to make a film in any other way, if I'm honest with you. I feel that strongly about it. I've been making films for 30 years. This is the best experience I've ever had.
Yeah.
And I would step on set next week, same crew, same restrictions, same budget, and I'd love to make another one. And I'm trying to write one now. It's not easy. That's the hard bit, is getting the idea. Even the writing isn't that hard. It's just getting an idea and feeling so good about it that you're willing to give the next 3 years of your life to it and stake your career on it. That's the hard bit.
Well, look, everything you've done has really paid off. It's such a beautiful piece of work. So thank you for and unless there was anything else you wanted to talk about, I just want to say thanks so much for telling us how you made this beautiful film.
No, I would be happy to talk for another 4 hours, but there'd be no one left on the call.
I'd be here.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm very happy. Listen, thank you for your time, Alex, and thank you for researching everything so well and having such great questions. Thank you.
No, thank you very much.
This podcast was recorded at a Directors UK member event. You can hear plenty more directors in conversation by subscribing on the usual streaming platforms. Follow us on social media and find out more about us at directors.uk.com.